but I just want to thank everyone for having me here today. And this is, I guess, sort of my first dive into Fire Chat as the host. And thank you to Dr. Kaplan for allowing me to be a part of it. As people can see, he's around. And basically, this is a chance for us to talk a little bit about diabetes and the endocannabinoid system. Most specifically in regards to medical cannabis and what we sort of know and what we don't know. The genesis of this talk is twofold. Number one, it's obviously Diabetes Day and Diabetes Month in education. And so it's an opportunity for us to just plug how important a disease this is and unfortunately how significant the metabolic syndrome is and everything that goes along with that. The second genesis of this is that about 2 months ago, I happened to give this talk to a number of diabetes educators in a hospital down here in South Florida, and it was basically a audience who really had no idea of anything about medical cannabis or the endocannabinoid system. And so the first, I would say, third or half of this talk will go through the endocannabinoid system, and hopefully everybody is aware of what that is. And if they're not, then that's great because we'll go through it. And I'd like to go it rather quickly because I think as hopefully more people jump on and we get to some of the articles that I'll talk to you all about at the end in regards to diabetes, that we can maybe open up the discussion with Dr. Kaplan, myself, and then of course others in the group, because I think it's always a good opportunity to just discuss about what we know, what's going on in medical cannabis, and then of course if there's anything related to our talk and diabetes, we can of course expound on that. But without further ado, my hope today is to again rather quickly describe the endocannabinoid system, what makes up the endocannabinoid system, because I think the key points to this talk, or the key points to what we're going to mention, is that there is a lot of information in the scientific world that links what we are starting to learn about the endocannabinoid system and different diseases. And this particular talk will link what we know that exists in regards to the endocannabinoid system, and then most specifically diabetes. This is not a talk that's going to say, if you take X, this will fix Y. But what it will do is give an opportunity that as we're learning more about the endocannabinoid system and what we do know about diabetes and the metabolic syndrome, which is a hallmark of abnormal findings in a patient, as well as other types of symptoms and syndromes that accompany the metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance, and of course diabetes. There is a lot more information that we're trying to piece together, which I think ultimately will drive pharmaceutical companies, or at least companies that are interested in now what we're learning about the endocannabinoid system, to hopefully give us other tools that we can use to hopefully prevent insulin resistance and then ultimately the development of diabetes. We will discuss briefly what cannabinoids, and those are the essential parts of the plant, which we'll get to, that we as humans can actually consume. Most people in the group hopefully will know that. And then again, I'll discuss 6 articles that are very scientific, but what I'll do is I will ask you to probably spare a lot of the details on the slides, and I'll go over them for you. And then when I gave this talk, I did have a couple of slides in regards to Florida, and then what I will do is, and what the indications are here. But I think what I'll just express to the listeners is that there are a lot of indications, at least what people use medical cannabis for. Depending on the state, there are some indications that you have to qualify for. But again, I think it's just a good idea to see the landscape of what's going on. So without further ado, I want to just get people to think about who we're talking about here. We're talking about a man or a woman, but most specifically in this talk right now, we're talking about patients that have diabetes, have an abnormal hemoglobin A1C. For those of you who don't know, that gives you the percentage of red blood cells in your body that have a high amounts of sugar on it. And if you have more than about 5%, let's just say roughly, that starts to get you into the category of diabetes. This patient is on some diabetes medications. Metformin has sort of been around for a long time. The next medicine he's on is blood pressure medication. ACE inhibitor stands for the class of drugs that those are. So if you're on drugs like lisinopril, enalapril, captopril, those sorts of drugs. HDL refers to a type of what's supposed to be called the good type of cholesterol. And this number of 30 is very low. LDL is a lower density lipoprotein, and it's supposed to be your bad type of cholesterol. And this is obviously elevated. We like for it to be under 200, especially in diabetics with a lot of other risk factors. This patient happens to be a little overweight, and he smokes cigarettes. And so, not to say that this is our typical American, hopefully it's not, but this is a category of patients, whether male, female, race, religion, that unfortunately exists in a high population, even around the world. But of course, we're here in the United States. The common symptoms or complaints that patients with diabetes have is that they have a lot of nerve pain. They, of course, have a lot of other pain. Some of that's related to nerves. Some of that's just related to disuse or being out of shape, or just being heavy and your muscles hurt, or just because you're completely unhealthy and you're just not eating a good diet. You're not exercising. You're not taking care of yourself. And also some of these medications that people are on, these are common side effects. Musculoskeletal pain is a very common side effect of patients that take lipid lowering drugs. So these are real problems that patients are having. And, as we get older, we just have pain. And, of course, this patient's having problems following a diet, and his goals are to, of course, lose weight and have less pain. So again, this isn't the exact patient we're talking about, but just to get you introduced into who we want to talk about. So for those of you, I like to say, who have lived under a rock, or a very big rock, these are cannabis plants. This is marijuana. I'm shocked as to how many times I give talks where I show pictures and there's a raise of hands of who hasn't seen it. And it gets me excited, because that's one person that we're probably going to teach something to. And if it's just being able to identify what a plant looks like, then that's okay. But what you can see here is that there's, in the bottom left, there's the classic leaf pattern. In the top left, you're starting to see what we call the buds. This is the flower that starts to form when you hear people who are ingesting flower. In the top right, you see a nice, somewhat fuzzy picture of nice little glistening sort of structures on there, which is where a lot of the chemicals are found. There's our trichomes, and then you have a nice, beautiful, probably the clearest picture on the lower right on a bright sunny day. Let's just call it in Oregon, where a nice plant is growing. This just gives you a landscape of what's going on in the country with cannabis. There's a lot of green and a lot of dark green, and that basically means that there's very, very few gray, where these states have no access to public, or there's no public access cannabis program. If I showed this map 20 years ago, there probably would be everything would be gray. So again, things are changing. This is sort of my classic hallmark, and I'm going to have to change it because the list is getting longer. But what I do is I like to show people that when I started talking about cannabis, and when I started looking at different talks or looking at different research articles for talks that I gave, in just 3-4 years, the amount of articles that are being published, and probably all of them are in Dr. Kaplan's library, which you can find on the website, no plug intended. But you can see that there's a whole landscape of articles that are just that are coming out. And so for the purposes of this talk, I did not look in 2017 because I did not do this talk then, but you can see that there's not many articles that are starting to get into the area of diabetes, obesity, diabetes pain, or just diabetes in general. 175 when I last checked. So let's quickly talk about the plant, because I think in order to understand why cannabis and marijuana and hemp and everything is so important, you need to know a little bit about the plant. So there's a lot of compounds. The active compounds that we like to talk about are the phytocannabinoids. Phyto means plant. Those are the cannabinoids that are in the plant. The terpenoids, which we'll get to, which is a very important part of people's armamentarium. And then flavonoids are another important part of the plant. And again, we'll talk about all of this. Real quickly, as things are changing in terms of what we know and don't know, and how we use nomenclature or we talk about things, basically when people are talking about different strains they want to get, so whether you're talking about Blue Dream or Rick Simpson's oil or various things that you hear in the layman's, these are from a plants or botany standpoint, these are called chemobars. And then the most important phytocannabinoids, at least from what is talked about the most, is THC. And as everyone can see, there's a long name for that, CBD, cannabidiol. These are pretty much the two most common things that you're hearing people talk about. And to be honest, in a state like mine in Florida, this is really all people talk about, because this is really what you're ordering or what you're getting from the dispensary, even though there's a whole hallmark of things which I'll get to, which are important, such as the next bullet, which mentions CBN, CBG, or THCV. And again, these are just a few of the probably between 100 and 200, depending on where you read, active ingredients, if you want to call it, that are in the plant that all have different instructions or information that it can give the body, or that it can have medicinal type effect or just change physiology to help all of us. And then the second to the last bullet, I just think it's important for people to know, because there's a lot of discussion about what hemp is and what it means. And by definition, really, the hemp has less than 0.3% THC. And that's important because THC is really what has caused the ruckus in our government and in our world, so to speak, in regards to what's legal and what's illegal. And so because something has less than 0.3% THC, it can be called hemp. That's a whole nother discussion. But that it involves that things can cross state lines, because as the Farm Bill allows this to take place, which is why you can order CBD with very low THC from pretty much all over the world. For those interested in what chemical structures look like, this is a 20 carbon chain, and let's not focus on that, but that's just for the chemistry folks. So let's go into the plant a little bit more in detail. So as I mentioned before, the phytocannabinoids are formed and concentrated in those sticky little hairy things that I showed in those pictures called trichromes. It's really what gives the plant a little bit of its beauty. When you get those nice slides showing 100,000 magnified slides, you see these nice sticky little fingers, and that's where a lot of these phytocannabinoids, CBG, CBD, THC, all of these things come from. And here's a nice picture of it. It almost looks like you're looking at an animal or a caterpillar here, but those are the sticky little things where all the magic happens. Terpenes are really the essential oils of the plants, and these occur everywhere. So if you walk outside, although if you're in Massachusetts, there might not be any leaves on the trees, but if you walk outside and look at flowers, trees, there's essential oils. These are where the terpenoids come from. And there's an article at the bottom of this slide. And again, this talk will all be available in the CED library, and it's also on YouTube. And so hopefully you don't need to write down and take notes, because this is all there. But this is an example of a very common terpene called beta-caryophyllene, which is in your black pepper. But this is just one article that specifically talks about a terpenoid called beta-caryophyllene and diabetes and the benefits and potential benefits of it. Here's a picture of just the carbon structure on the left, and then on the right, basically what the names are of different terpenes. So I think it's just important to recognize that there are a lot of different terpenes that exist in a lot of the foods we eat, or the different types of additives that we put to food. And this is something that people will start to look at when they're purchasing products, because if it has more of these types of products or chemicals, let's just call it, in the flour you're buying, or even in the oils, you can have secondary effects that are possible. So to give a perfect example, I have a woman that called me the other day who's unfortunately relapsed with cancer, and she has a mass in her pelvis that's pressing on her gastrointestinal tract. She's got horrible nausea. She's got horrible reflux related to this, and she's sad and she's not feeling well. So we talked about, maybe just adding some citrus if she's able to tolerate it, or something with limonene, to give an example that you can see there, that might help with some of these things. So it doesn't mean that everyone's going to have these effects, but I think the importance is that these effects can be there. And it's important when you look at the products that you're potentially getting. Real quickly along the way, if there's anybody that has questions, just please raise your hand and I'll stop and be happy to answer them. Here's another example of terpenes. This is just a little different type of slide. If people are interested in strains, again, it's a whole nother discussion, but just another areas or another example of what the effects we think are of different terpene products. At the bottom, sort of where you can find it in the real world or in your supermarkets. And then, of course, if you're super into strains, there's some strains that are noted or known for having higher content of these. So flavonoids is the last compound in the plant. This is what gives plants their pigmentation, helps filter UV rays, It's why you see bugs and bees and all interesting other animals that like to fly around plants. And these are in a lot of the things that we already eat. And again, there's other studies that these parts of the cannabis plant can have a lot of really beneficial types of physiology, so to speak. So these are the buzzwords that we always think about when we eat or when we exercise: anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. Think about berries when people are always talking about all the great things that can come from berries. Antifungal means things that can prevent a fungal infection. So common diseases or common things that people get fungal infections could be a yeast in their private areas, or what's called um, uh, on your feet when you can get abnormalities in your feet when you're walking and you get
Lead to it.
fungus there. I'm spacing on the
Athlete's foot.
athlete's foot, and I mean, and I'm even exercising all the time. But thank you, Dr. Kaplan. Athlete's foot, and then anti-cancer, anti-allergic, and then here's some things you can see here that these are our common foods here that can have flavonoids, other sources. And if you look, I mean, it's quite obvious that these are all healthy foods that are on here. But again, this is something that's in the cannabis plant. So really the beauty of putting this all together when it comes to cannabis and medical cannabis and everything we talk about with the endocannabinoid system is what Dr. Mushallam in the 60s came up to recognize and talk about, that really it's getting all of this together in one. It's sort of like when you make your shake in the morning, or you mix your creatine, you mix your yogurt, you mix your whatever it is. You're trying to get the whole effect of everything and make it taste good. And so, we're really hoping that cannabis does the same thing. And it's a combination of all these things that you see here, the three things that we just talked about. And it's not one size fits all. I think that's we talk about this over and over and over again. Everybody is different. Every body is different. Everyone's physiology is different. And so that affects what we call our endocannabinoid system, which is the system that we've learned through cannabis, that cannabis can be involved with in our own bodies. But it's really bringing all of these things together. And it's the hope that with all of these things together, we can focus now and shift it towards our body and what we call the endocannabinoid system. Again, endo means inside, cannabinoid means like cannabis. And really through Dr. Mishalam and other really smart scientists and looking at the plant, we were able to actually identify that in our body, we have a whole system, just like all the systems you see on the right of the screen, which interact with what we call the endocannabinoid system. And we really learned about it through learning in the plant and then learning about what's called receptors, which I'll talk about, and different things that it does. And this is really the beauty of what Dr. Kaplan and I are trying to do. We're trying to understand what's going on in each person's endocannabinoid system, knowing that it's all different, knowing that it's very complex, and hoping that we can sort of restructure or revamp the system to function more efficiently, so that all the symptoms, syndromes, diseases that people are having, there's a whole nother multitude of medications or a whole nother multitude of an approach that we can use to try to improve your disease, and especially what we're talking about today, diabetes. So there's really four main parts of what we've learned about our system. This is everything that the mammals have, this endocannabinoid system. The job of it is really to help to relax us, to tell us when to eat, tell us when to sleep, tell us what to remember, tell us what to forget. How do we get protection qualities, or like the fight or flight that you think about? When do you run away? When do you stay calm? When do you just sit and relax? And all of this is made up or part of our endocannabinoid system. And it's really four physiologic principles. And it's involved with how cells stay alive, how cells die, what's our immune response. All of this is interacting with that. How do our nerves, our the electricity, if you want to call it, that's telling us or helping act to do things to our muscles and to move and to talk, how all of that works. And then, of course, how does our body metabolize, make energy, use energy, get rid of energy? How can it make it in alternative ways that are healthy? Or how can we bring things into our body that are healthy as opposed to unhealthy? And all of these things are interacting. So it seems like I'm basically saying that this system does everything, but the answer is it does. It's involved with pretty much everything that we do. And that's why this picture on the right is really important, because it's another arm in this large arm of systems or piece of the pie that's just as important as everything else. So there's categories of this system. This is where we start to get a little scientific. I don't want everyone to worry or burden everybody with too much of this. I think it's just more important that what I tell people over and over again when I give this talk is that there's a lot of science that we know, And there's a lot that we've learned about this system. And because of all of this, this is where we're starting to incorporate this into various diseases where we're actually studying the endocannabinoid system in one particular disease. How is it interacting with somebody? So there's some compounds that our body makes. Those are called endocannabinoids, and I'll talk about it in a second. Those endocannabinoids resemble the same compounds that are in the cannabis plant, like THC and CBD. There's receptors. The way I describe receptors are basically like doors. You have to be able to open the door, whether you turn the knob, whether you have a key, whether you push the door open. But we have these doors that sit on a lot of our cells, and something has to tell them what to do. And so that's sort of the second part of what the endocannabinoid system is involved with, in these categories. The third are enzymes. Enzymes are proteins. These are what we call catalysts. So these are chemicals that help make a process take place. And that might be simply making sodium, to give an example, move across a cell, and then potassium move the other way across the cell, which then allows these doors to open, and then a multitude of molecules and other things can move through and cause various processes to take place, which is what's number 4. And so a sort of a way to look at that without getting too scientific is, if we look at the outside, I think hopefully you can see my mouse, but where it says AEA and 2AG, that would be sort of the first category outside the cell. If you look at the wall here, that's being, it's almost like the fence here, this is outside the cell, and this is the membrane, and then we get inside the cell. And we're talking about a transport process. It's sort of like if you're driving your kids to school, you got to start in your house, you got to move outside your house, you got to get into your car, and then you got to drive your car, and you ultimately get there. And that's what's happening constantly in our body with different chemical reactions. And so what we know is that anandamide and 2AG, or AEA, those are the 2 endocannabinoids that we make, and they're very similar in not only structure but in reactions, as if you're giving yourself or administering THC or CBD. These are just 2 of the examples that they're very similar to. And that's actually how we learned about the endocannabinoid system. People were able to make what's called synthetic, so not real THC and CBD, gave it to patients, put a dye on there, and they were able to track it in their bodies and see where it was going, and ultimately found that we have these same things in our body. So don't focus too much, but basically there's a lot of science about this endocannabinoid system. This is just a nice pictorial of where these doors that I'm talking about, because everything that we're talking about in regards to how this system works is where can it work and where can it affect certain parts of our body. And if you look, it's pretty much everywhere. The darker purple is what we call CB1. And these were the first receptors that were found. They're mostly in the central nervous system. So we're talking about the brain and the spinal cord. And then we have CB2 receptors, which were the second receptor found. And these are mostly found outside the central nervous system, although some exist where there are CB1 receptors. And then there are a lot of anti-inflammatory organs. So the spleen, which is an organ that sits in the upper left quadrant or the upper left side of our body. It's involved a lot in our inflammatory reaction, or how we fight infections. Our bone marrow, which helps make white blood cells and red blood cells, right here. And you can see some other things. The liver, a lot of these are involved in our immunologic system. But I think the teaching point here is that it's pretty much everywhere, which means that there's a lot of action going on in regards to this system and manipulation of how our body works. I think the teaching point on this slide is, again, this is that there are a lot of these receptors everywhere. To give an idea of a comparison, so there's a receptor, again, these are the doors, called a mu receptor, and that's involved in our pain. So narcotics, morphine, fentanyl, those sorts of things work on mu receptors. And in our brain and spinal cord, we have a lot of these receptors, which is why that's where a lot of our pain is initiated. But there's more than 10 times the amount of CB1 receptors in the central nervous system than there are mu receptors. So again, lots of these doors, lots of action going on, and a lot that cannabis can be involved with. This is just a very complicated, this is again me proving a point that the endocannabinoid system is complex. This is real, this is not made up, and this is all the things that we're learning. So what's available? Basically, depending on where you live, you can get different types of things. CBD is really what we talk about the most. What actually the genesis of this talk was, I was sent an article on CBD and diabetes. And my first response is, well, that's just sort of one chemical. And I think that we as a sort of, let's call us non-cannabinoid specialists, or people that really aren't doing this every day, really think that CBD is everything. I mean, people used to say, do you still have your CBD clinic? Are you a CBD doctor? And the goal of this is just one piece of the pie. Now, it happens to be very prevalent in the plant, and it happens to be very important, which we'll talk about. But again, this is just one type of product that you can take. Again, because it's in the hemp plant, which we already discussed is less than 0.3%, you're able to get it pretty much everywhere. If you go to Dr. Kaplan's website, you can learn about the fact that not all CBD is CBD. And again, that's a whole nother discussion. But again, CBD is important because it can work on the receptors that we just talked about, but it works differently than THC, which is why you can have benefits from different chemicals. So just like when you have high blood pressure, you might need 2 or 3 different medications to try to get your blood pressure controlled, and they all work differently. You wouldn't be giving the same drug 3 different times that does the same thing. And so it's the same thing with your diabetes. If you're not quite yet on insulin, you might take oral agents, and one of them works in the liver, one of them might work in the muscle, and then one of them might work in the stomach to actually prevent you from digest or making more glucose. So that's one. CBD. THC, which really is, I think, for everyone who knows, is the monkey in the room, or is the the ugly duckling, if you want to call it, and that's because of the concerns that people have about euphoria. And when we talk about medical cannabis here, we're really talking about a scientific effect. Yes, there could be an effect of this that causes euphoria, but our goal is not necessarily to just give THC for that, but because THC works on so many different things. And again, because it binds very well to the CB1 receptor, which is in the brain, it does a lot of things which are very, very important. It just so happens to bind to a part of the brain that can make you high or make you euphoric. But then we have the ability to give other medications, or I'm sorry, other chemicals like CBD that happens to sit on those doors where it can make you high and prevent you from getting high. So you get the medical benefit, but you don't get that euphoria. Again, we use THC for a lot of different things. And then just to name a few, again, not to belabor the point, but since I am going to mention a couple of these and a couple of the papers that I'm mentioning, these are just some other ones. And again, these are all ideas and thoughts that we think, and some data to show what we think it might do. So CBG, I sort of teach people that it has a lot to do with neuroinflammation. So a lot of inflammation, especially near your nerves, which is why I've been using this a lot lately with patients with neuromuscular problems or degenerative neurologic diseases like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease, or Lou Gehrig's, which is also called ALS. And then we get into some rare ones, but very important. But CBDA is really an untouched cannabinoid that Dr. Kaplan uses a lot. Now I've been using more since I've learned a lot about CBDA. But basically, the A means acidic, and so it's in the dry or the before it's being combusted, and then it turns into CBD. And the same thing with THCA and THC. These are the different ways that you can get products. Again, I don't want people to get caught up on this, because the talk is meant to link this with diabetes. But you can inhale it. You can inhale in different ways. You can take it by mouth. You can keep it under your tongue. You can have creams. There's patches. You can spray it in the nose like Nasonex or nasal spray. You can use suppositories. So really, if you think about all the different ways that you can take medications, you can also take products from the cannabis plant. So if there's no hands up, and I'm not seeing any yet, I'll get to sort of the next part of the talk, which is about diabetes, and that's the genesis of our talk today. I think everyone knows that this is unfortunately a pretty devastating disease. In 2017, there was just millions and millions of people that have it. It doesn't mean that everyone who is obese has diabetes, and it doesn't mean that everyone who has diabetes is obese. But unfortunately, because of our problems with obesity and what's called the metabolic syndrome, which is again a hallmark of findings where it's high fat in our periphery, having high triglyceride levels, obesity does contribute to that, having abnormal LDL levels, but basically fit into this sort of syndrome, which ultimately causes what's called insulin resistance, meaning that our body makes insulin, which is a chemical that helps utilize sugar so that we can make energy. And over time, when you develop this syndrome, you have to make more and more insulin because your body is not able to, you're not as sensitive as you used to. So for every amount of sugar that or glucose your body, excuse me, however your blood glucose level is, it's taking more and more insulin to the point that these people become resistant. And then you actually can't make any more insulin, or it doesn't work at all. And then you need to actually take insulin. But the different things that are involved with what's causing this process is that your beta cells, which are the cells in your pancreas that make insulin and glucagon, but mostly insulin, are not working anymore. Again, you can have a decrease in your sensation to insulin. Inflammation overall can cause problems with insulin, which we're going to talk about. Mitochondrial dysfunction. Your mitochondria are the little workhorses, if you remember from biology, that are inside the cell that are very complicated. That is where a lot of the energy that glucose is utilized gets made. And then apoptosis is a term that's really become prevalent over the last 30 years or so, which is called programmed cell death. And so our body has a way of getting rid of cells that don't need to live anymore. And also that process can be abnormal. And this is a huge part of cancer therapy, where you're trying to get bad cells to die and good cells to live. So people with diabetes, have a lot of problems with their nutritional factors, or they're not getting foods that are good, that have good nutrition factors. They're getting very high caloric foods. People are not exercising as much. They're starting to use other substances that are not as good for whatever reason. This might be alcohol. This might be other drugs. This might just be over-the-counter drugs that people are using to try to fix other problems, but would cause a new problem. People's lifestyle habits are changing. And of course, all of this is leading towards what we call the metabolic syndrome. So when people have diabetes, what do they try to do? Well, they try to control their sugar. They try to, people are trying to make safer and more effective drugs in the pharmaceutical industry. People obviously try to limit their risk factors. So people try to lose weight. They try to get up off the couch or the bed, or if you're working too much, or your desk, and trying to exercise more. Limit all your risk factors if you're a smoker, if you drink alcohol, and then of course a better diet. And then there's things called nutraceuticals, which is basically pharmaceutical type chemicals that are over the counter. And so even things like terpenes, which we just talked about, I would call a phytochemical. But again, things that you're getting from your diet that can actually have good medicinal effect and work within our body and our physiology. But the point of this talk, and again, is that, and our interest in terms of what we do at CED and people with medical cannabis, is really to look for other sources of care that we can provide that can help make disease better, and of course do it in a much safer way. So over the last couple of years, these are just a list of some articles that have been published. I don't talk about all of these, and I'm not expecting everyone to know what all the letters mean, but I think the important part of it is that there's been articles that relate to a horrific pain and anorexia type syndrome that can be affected with diabetes, meaning that they have no appetite, they have horrible pain, and it's mostly related to diabetes. But there's been a case study how cannabis helped this person. Most people that have very uncontrolled diabetes developed horrific neuropathic pain, so pain coming from the nerves. Basically, the nerves are being damaged because you have tons of sugar that's sitting on the nerves, and so they don't work anymore. NAFLD is going to be something that most people are going to start learning as a kid in school, because it's now going to be the most common, probably, if it isn't, but it is the most common reason for liver transplant. Prior to this, it was Tylenol toxicity from overuse of Tylenol, but NAFLD stands for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is one of the hallmarks of metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance, but I am going to talk about an article. And then, of course, everyone knows that diabetes is associated with stroke. It's associated with heart attacks. But these are basically the types of patients that people are starting to study, since there's such a high relevance. And can cannabinoids be used to help these patients? So the first study here is that article that I mentioned that was given to me in regards to the evidence regarding effects of CBD in people with diabetes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I think it's a really good read. Basically, what I think it will do is review a lot of the things I talked about in the beginning of this talk, which is the endocannabinoid system. And then it gives a lot of good physiology or ideas about why we think CBD works. And then it gives a lot of very quick paragraphs here and there of a lot of the articles that I just mentioned before. So again, when you look at this talk, this is just a good, and it's not a very sciencey paper. It's really written. It's a nursing and a nutrition consultant type paper. People who are dietitians and diabetes educators. That's what ADCES is. So it's a really good layman's review article. The second article is getting into sort of the meat. Now, again, this gets very complicated and techy in terms of the science, and I don't want people to get caught up on this. But basically, what they were trying to look at is the science. In science and in the lab, you're able to create pretty much animals. Mostly they're mice, rodents, sometimes even cats or monkeys. But you're able to create a disease in animals, and mice is one of the most common animal that they do this with. And you can actually breed mice that are genetically predisposed to get diseases that we know. And so unfortunately that's how we learn things. But in here they were giving mice who had the metabolic syndrome, so they fit all the categories and the criteria that I discussed, and they were basically looking to see that if they gave all these mice a high-fat diet versus the control, which is a normal diet, and then gave them different cannabinoids, what's the effect? And so they were specifically looking at non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which I just talked about. And so they gave these mice that already have metabolic syndrome, so you can, for all intents and purposes, call them pre-diabetic or somewhat diabetic, but not healthy. And they gave them, they gave a normal diet with no cannabinoids whatsoever, and then they gave a high-fat diet and then different types of cannabinoids to overall see if it made any difference. And I think the take-home point to this is not that we can automatically bring this to the human world, but that there were some benefits and that there were things seen that gave us an idea and helped to teach us that there's a lot of manipulation going on with our endocannabinoid system that's dysfunctional. And it's not just about losing weight, and it's not just about taking drugs, but you can actually make some changes from cannabinoids. So THC given to these mice completely took away these mice who were still getting a high-fat diet and prevented them from getting non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So I just told you that pretty much everybody who has metabolic syndrome gets this. And so there's no drug right now that is being given to these patients that reverses non-alcoholic fatty liver disease unless they change their diet and take other things. So here's an example of where if you don't even change your diet, in fact, give them even a fatter diet, that THC prevented the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So it's an example of a cannabinoid can have a lot of benefit, and it's working in a different mechanism, but it's working through a mechanism that's through this endocannabinoid system. So it's food for thought is what it is. And it's teaching us that there's a lot of things going on in the metabolic syndrome that is not, that's different than what we're learning and what we're making a lot of drugs about. And then the other thing that was noted in this group was that there was an improved glucose response curve, meaning that for every amount as the glucose went up, that the insulin levels were not changing, which is exactly the antithesis or the opposite of what I described. In diabetes, you start to, as your sugar goes up, you need more and more insulin to the point where you will either become completely desensitized or your pancreas just stops making it. So this is what we like to see in patients who have diabetes. We like to see that as their insulin levels are or the body's becoming more sensitive and they're not developing these abnormalities, that their insulin is actually starting to work, or the drugs that they're on. So take home message, THC, a great cannabinoid, helped limit non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in patients still getting a high-fat diet. So even if you then gave them a good diet or changed their diet, who knows, what else can happen. The downside to this article was that CBD really didn't cause any improvement. And I see that Janice made a comment. I'm surprised that CBD increased inflammatory gene. Yes, so that was exactly. So you caught exactly what I was getting at. And that's that, again, one study. That's why we don't, try to make conclusions based on one study. And maybe this is an example of where, in a high-fat diet, there's something going on in the endocannabinoid system where CBD is not working very well. Doesn't mean we shouldn't give it. But again, that's a great pickup that you had. And then of course, why we're trying to learn more. And then Janice is asking just real quick, was it whole plant or isolate? And I'm pretty sure that it was isolate, but I'll have to go back and look. Good question. In the second article, this specifically looked at obesity, endocannabinoid system dysregulation, and insulin sensitivity, as we've talked about. So they had, different mice, and CB1, as we talked about, is the cannabinoid receptor. They had mice where the CB1 was knocked out, meaning that they had mice that basically are born, or they're able to genetically manipulate it so they don't have any CB1. Sometimes they can actually manipulate where the CB1 is lacking. So it could just be lacking in the liver. It could just be lacking in the muscle. And again, they're looking to identify different things. So this was an article where they had knockout mice. They knocked out the CB1 receptor just in the liver, because they're trying to understand what's the process that's going on in the liver. So these were all also fed a high-fat diet. The reason why CB1 has become very important or intriguing is that there actually used to be a drug, and I'm spacing on the name of it, that was a CB1 receptor that was being used to make people not as hungry, to decrease satiety, and it actually worked. It was helping with people lose weight, but it was causing a lot of abnormal problems, psychosis being one of them. So it was taken off the market in Europe. However, what we did learn about is that the CB1 receptor is very important. And so when they blocked in the liver, when they blocked the CB1 in these mice became heavier because they were being, fed this diet. But their glucose became much more tolerant, and their insulin became much more. They became more glucose tolerant because their insulin was becoming more sensitive. So again, we don't know exactly why the CB1 receptor, or why manipulating the CB1 receptor in this physiology, if you want to call it, was causing the changes in their glucose and their insulin sensitivity. But what it makes us think is that there's something going on in the liver, something going on with CB1, something intriguing with the endocannabinoid system. And so if we focus, again, there are drugs that can specifically work in specific organ systems, but basically these patients didn't get prevented from being fat in this high-fat diet, but it did help with their glucose tolerance and their insulin sensitivity. This is an article titled "Acute Activation of Cannabinoid Receptors by Anandamide." So it's specifically looking at the endocannabinoid system in the GI tract. And so what we know in diabetes is that type 2 diabetics most specifically have a problem with what's called GI tract motility, meaning does food and how do things move through the GI tract. And sometimes there's a concern that if things are going slowly, meaning if the body's not moving chemicals or moving food through the body very well, that will cause insulin spikes or different changes in patients that will affect what's called their postprandial glucose, after they're eating. And so there's a concern that if patients' GI tracts aren't moving very well, that when they eat, that food can actually stay in the stomach longer, so that your eating time or your post-eating time sugar can stay high or peak continuously, because you're really not digesting things very well. So in this article, they were looking at anandamide and other active metabolites in the endocannabinoid system, and basically what they were able to see that by activating the cannabinoid receptors, mostly through CB1, which is in the GI tract, they were able to show that the postprandial glucose actually was improved. And what they were hypothesizing was, is this related to that they were able to control how fast the food was moving, or is it able to control because they were actually that the endocannabinoid system was manipulating how hungry people got, and that it might not make them eat more. And so basically what they were able to see was that the CB1 receptor was actually able to be affected, was not affecting how things moved fast and through, but really how the nutrients and other things were being absorbed. So again, just another example of the CB1 receptor in the GI tract, other places where it's located, that it's abnormal in the endocannabinoid system, abnormal in these diabetics, and making this function a little bit better might help with patients' glucose control. And they were able to see that patients' anandamide, which again is which is one of the endocannabinoids that we have that's similar to THC, can help make change. Again, these are very technical studies, and I'm trying to make them, more just to get the Cliff Notes version. But again, my goal of the explanation here is that there's a lot of research into how is the endocannabinoid system abnormal in diabetics, and how using medical cannabis and cannabinoids can maybe cause improvement. This study here is talking about the endocannabinoid system and what they call the endocannabinoidome, which is really sort of the kingdom or the hallmark of all these things put together. But basically, they were looking to study how the different chemicals or different parts of the endocannabinoid system in the regulation of food consumption and energy balance, and basically looking at different types of, basically if the CB1 receptor was upregulated, that they were able to see that it was involved with insulin resistance and some other problems related to diabetes. This was a study basically looking at other cannabinoids and trying to look at their primary focus, or their primary goal was to look to see if giving different types of cannabinoids in patients with diabetes can change their lipid parameters. So you always go to the doctor and you hear you want your LDL to be low, you want your HDL to be high. And so if patients got cannabinoids like CBD or THCV, which is sort of a newer talked about cannabinoid, can it cause any changes? And their hypothesis was that because of what we're learning about the CB1 receptor, especially with it being in the liver and especially with being the GI tract, if we give cannabinoids, trying to manipulate the endocannabinoid system, does it cause changes in the HDL? And unfortunately, it didn't really cause, CBD didn't cause really any changes, but it did decrease some other chemicals that could be helpful. So resistin is something that exists within our body, and it actually, when this goes up, then it can accelerate when this goes down, it can accelerate the accumulation of LDL. And then there's something called gastric inhibitory peptide, which was increased, and that can help with preserving beta cell function or function of the pancreas. So again, it was able to just show that there were some other sort of secondary issues that help deal with glucose control, that help deal with what makes us hungry, what makes our LDL chemicals go down. And then THCV, which is another chemical, reduced glucose and improved glucose response on an oral glucose tolerance test. But basically, HDL did not get affected in any of these studies, but what it did show that some cannabinoids can have some other byproduct type effects. So again, we're not trying to make what we're doing here with medical cannabis be the end all, that it's just going to fix all our problems, but they're adjuncts to therapy. Again, it's just like when you are taking your medications for blood pressure, you don't stop trying to lose weight. You don't stop exercising because you don't think that, because you're on your medication. You got to do other things, and cannabis can also help significantly with that. This is basically an article that just looked at endocannabinoid system dysregulation, and there's some linkage on the bottom. Again, this is just another way of people looking to see that, looking at 2-AG, anandamide, GPR55, which again, you don't need to know, but if you go back to the earlier parts of the slide, these are information chemicals, so to speak, or making action take place. They're looking at these, and these are all out of whack. And again, if the endocannabinoid system can function better, then hopefully we can get some improvement. So this is, so just real quickly, the articles were not meant to confuse anyone. Again, I hope people listening to this aren't coming out saying or coming out thinking that this was going to be a talk that says this is what you can do for your diabetes, and here is all the data to show that we have it, and here's what you can do to make things better. I think what it's showing importance of is that there's no doubt there's I hear some music. I'm not sure if that's me, but you can the endocannabinoid system is just another tier towards the therapy that you can use for your disease process. So in this article here, or in this thing here, here's all the different things that we think CBD does, or we think that CBDV does, or we think that CBC or CBG might be involved with. Doesn't mean that this is exactly correct, and it doesn't mean that this is going to be for everybody, but these are all the different cannabinoids that can help, and these are all important things that are going on in our body. So in my state, this is just sort of the indications. As you can see, it doesn't say diabetes anywhere here, but diabetes is an autoimmune disease. And in some states, an autoimmune disease will link you towards other diseases. But this is just an example of showing what's out there. So I'm going to stop there because I think that basically the conclusions are really just to show people, basically I wanted people to learn about the plant. I wanted people to understand that the plant has a lot of chemicals that are really important, and that our body is making chemicals that are exactly like the chemicals that are in cannabis. And if they're not working properly, then our body might not be working properly, and we can have lots of symptoms and signs and diseases that take place from there. And really what I'm trying to show you is that there's a lot of data that's starting to take place looking at the hallmark findings that exist in patients with diabetes, with metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. And as we're learning about this phenomenal physiologic system called the endocannabinoid system, we're actually finding that cannabis can help manipulate this system in a positive way. And again, not every patient is the same. That can hopefully provide added benefit or added purpose to improving your disease. Again, it's not that you can just come off insulin if you're on insulin and your diabetes will get better. It's not that everybody who's on insulin and starts taking CBD will have effect, but it's really learning about this system and then starting to bring some of these chemicals to our cells or to our bodies to help change and make things better. So for instance, obviously people who can't do things on their own get placed on medication. So part of what we do at CED and when we see patients is adding cannabinoids so that we can be an adjunct to either patients that are on therapy with the hopes that we can supplement or change what's going on in their system so they might not need medication. Number two is to just improve their overall symptomatology or whatever the complaints or goals that they're having, even if it's just as simple as sleep, which can cause, if you're not getting enough sleep, which can cause increased inflammation, which can then help which can cause your endocannabinoid system to be, out of whack. So again, very complex. We're all learning together through our patients and through what we read. But I think that the future is bright in terms of what's going to happen in the endocannabinoid system in cannabis. And of course, with getting help to these patients with diabetes. I'll just give some anecdotal last comment before I open the questions. I've had about 4 or 5 diabetes patients who did no change to their regimen. They were coming to see me for neuropathy or coming to see me for some other complaints that they had and changed nothing except added cannabis, and their A1C went down over the course of several months. Again, the A1C is the percentage of red blood cells that have glucose attached to it, and that's what they follow. And since red blood cells live about 120 days, the A1C gives you an idea of what your glucose has been over the last several months. So just that in and of itself, I don't have papers to prove it, but just from anecdotal evidence, and I'm sure Dr. Kaplan can say the same. So I think for those of you who are diabetics and are interested in what we can do to help you, I think there's a lot we can do. I encourage you to keep reading about the endocannabinoid system, and hopefully this was helpful for you guys. And I'll open up questions or comments for whoever is around. So real quick, I'll just ask, was there a study, mostly because Janice had some great questions, but if was there a particular question about your own disease or your own family members that have been asking questions about cannabis, and that anything seems confusing or anything, questions that come up that I might be able to answer? So Janice's question here is, do you have general guidelines regarding chemovars? I'll just move this up. Mode of administration or dosing for diabetes? So that's a great question. In terms of general guidelines for chemovars, I don't. I mean, I'm not going to say that I have an exact chemovar. I do think that that's become a little bit hard because of the hybridization that's going on in a lot of the plants to say that this particular one, might do more. I mean, so I don't have, exact guidelines unless Dr. Kaplan has one. In terms of this second part with the mode of administration, I think that this goes back to sort of what are the goals of the patient and or how, where is the worst part of their day, or what they're looking for. If someone's just looking for overall disease modification, then having it last the longest in your body, the oral routes are going to be the best for that. So for instance, if you think about a long acting insulin, you take a long acting insulin in the morning, and hopefully it lasts for anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. Taking an oral agent, takes an hour or two to kick in the body or get to the peak point, and then it's going to sort of last throughout most of the day. So I think if people are looking for disease control as opposed to symptom control, like acute pain, then I would look towards some of the longer acting agents like the oils, and suppositories can last for a decent period of time. But basically things that are getting into your GI tract. And in terms of if you have a lot of neuropathy or pain, again, one symptom related to that, then that's going to be different. So if you think about when you're on narcotics, sometimes you take a long-acting narcotic and then you take a short-acting narcotic if you're having acute pain. Same thing with insulin. So if you need short-acting and you're not able to wait for your GI tract to work, then you might get into the vaping products or the inhaled products where it's going directly into your bloodstream. I include the nose when I say that, since you have a lot of blood vessels in the nose. So I think those are sort of the two main things. And then Janice has follow-up questions. And then if anyone else wants to chime in terms of a ratio, this is when it's patient independent. I think it depends on if the patient is marijuana naive. And I think it also depends on, again, what their goals are. But Dr. Kaplan said he was going to chime in on this question, so I'll let him chime in.
Sure. I mean, I agree with you completely. I think it's an awesome presentation, Dr. Exelbert. Thank you. THC and CBD are not the only sort of tools in the shed here. And we live in this culture that has adopted those as the most accessible. THC brings in a lot of money for the dispensaries, makes a lot of people happy. That's a good combination for a lucrative industry. And I think that's why we see it kind of dominating, the same way that when alcohol became legal in the 30s after Prohibition, all the bars were about getting smashed. But I think that's a short-term phenomenon. I think we're going to quickly see an evolution that includes a lot of the TRP receptor activators, like the THCV that Dr. Exelbert referred to earlier. I think that's going to dominate the future of cannabis, when people can really say, I want to treat this with cannabis, or I want to treat that, and get really kind of laser precise. We're not there yet because we don't have the specific studies that point to A equals B. But that being said, I think there is a reason why some people prefer CBD, a reason why other people prefer THC. We do have a smattering of studies that say, 2 to 1 or 11 to 1 in terms of a specific ratio are better. But honestly, the studies are not well powered. They're not universally kind of applicable. And to be honest, I'm not sure that the usual methods of study are appropriate for cannabis. There's a lot of our noggin that goes into medicine and how we feel better. And cannabis impacts that stuff. And to have a psychoactive medicine and study it as if that didn't matter is a huge confounding variable. So I think we have to take most of what we're learning right now with a grain of salt. I think there are other methods coming down the pipeline. But in terms of a concrete answer, I would recommend asking patients where their comfort is. And for most people, they're pretty clear that they like THC or they definitely do not. And I generally recommend, staying away from the extremes on both sides, just so you have synergistic effect, the entourage stuff that Dr. Exelbert was referring to. But I would let the patients guide the ship. I think that this is one medicine and one time in our kind of culture where we providers, including you, Janice, can kind of take a step back and empower the patient over their own journey, and let them look back on their own success as they did it. And we as supportive providers are there to help and educate and just let them achieve success, on their own.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And Dr. Kaplan in the chat room, I just saw just put a lot of really uh, great ties to the things that I was talking about in terms of what there might be some data out there. I think the important thing to remember is it's just like when people talk about cannabis and cancer, that it cures cancer. Well, we don't know that it does, but what we do know is that in some labs, and in some types of cancers, that there has been shown to be benefit. And probably the two biggest things that people are talking about are what's called glioblastoma multiforme, which is a devastating fatal brain tumor, and then of course breast cancer, where there are some lines of breast cancer that have shown great reduction of their cancer in the lab. And then there's all the people who when you go in chat rooms and when you listen, who have been doing this for years and haven't been doing a whole lot of other things and are disease free. And so I think we're in that middle ground. I think where we are in terms of clinicians, we're helping to bring the human side to the medicine and the human side to the disease. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who, because we don't have this data, don't think that what we're doing is okay. And I think what really the goal of this type of talk is that we have a lot of data. We have a lot of science that we know, and there's a lot of smart people who are learning about this in the lab and putting out these papers that we keep talking about, with the hopes that when we can take this to the patient, that we're now seeing real benefit, and then hopefully over time we publish these things. So there's a lot of types of problems. There's only so much ways to get cannabis, which we talked about. But at the same point in time, this is what's fun about what we do, is that we really get to empower the patient. We really get to work with the patient and let them teach us as we teach them, and work together, and so that more people can learn. And this is definitely a disease in terms of diabetes that unfortunately is affecting a lot of people. There's not a week that goes by in the pediatric intensive care unit where I work where there's not another child being diagnosed with diabetes. So it's real, it's out there, it's multifactorial, it's multi-race, it's multi-gender, and it's a problem. And there's no doubt that cannabis really does not have any deleterious effects. And in fact, probably there's a lot more beneficial effects, which will help a lot of other secondary things, just like exercise helps everything. I do want to thank everyone for participating. If there's no other hands being raised, because I think we went over, we'll finish. And I just want to thank everyone. Thank Dr. Kaplan for letting me. Thanks Lily, who works in the office, who always helps me. And if there's no further hands, thank you.